Welcome to the IISS this afternoon. My name is Rahul Roy Chaudhary. I'm the Senior Fellow for South Asia at the Institute. This is the first of this year's South Asia Program discussion meetings at Arundel House. It is appropriate we begin with a focus on cybersecurity and governance in India-UK relations. Last month, the Select Committee of the House of Lords published a report on UK foreign policy in a shifting world order, and among its recommendations noted the following. The UK has prioritized economic and trade links with India, but the potential security relationship has been underdeveloped. The government should seek to reset and evaluate its relationship with India by focusing on strategic priorities such as cybersecurity and maritime issues in the Indo-Pacific. In this context, India and the UK began their bilateral cyber dialogue in 2011-2012 and signed their first framework agreement on the cyber relationship last April. What are the prospects for enhancing India-UK cooperation on cybersecurity issues? How can India and the UK provide leadership within the UN Governmental Group of Experts framework to ensure an effective normative framework for cybersecurity norms? To discuss these and related issues, I am personally delighted to introduce our speaker, Ambassador Asoke Mukerji, former permanent representative of India to the United Nations, and a current and fully paid-up member of the IISS. Very important. Ambassador Mukerji served as India's permanent representative to the UN in New York from 2013 to 2015, and as Deputy High Commissioner of India to the UK from 2007 to 2010. In 2011 to 12, he led India's first cyber dialogues with the UK, the US, Japan, and Russia. And last year, Ambassador Mukerji chaired India's National Security Council Secretariat's multi-stakeholder group for recommending cyber norms for India. Ambassador Mukerji last spoke at the IISS in July 2012 to mark the release of India's new, then Central Asia policy, highlighted 2 days ago by the first India-Central Asia summit along with Afghanistan, taking place at the foreign ministers level in Uzbekistan. Ambassador Mukerji is also the proud author of 2 impressive publications on the first Indian soldiers in Europe, 1914 to 1916, titled Valor and Sacrifice, as well as a pictorial guide to Indian war memorials of the First World War. Ambassador Mukerji.
Thank you, Rahul, for that very generous introduction, and warm welcome and Happy New Year to all of you. And since you said this is the first event we are having this year, I will try and address the topic that has been suggested into 3 parts. The first part would be on India-UK cooperation on cybersecurity and cyber issues. And there's a reason for adding cyber issues to just the focus on cybersecurity. The second part would be on how we can collaborate in the United Nations Governmental Group of Experts framework. For those of you who follow this subject, you would know that since 2004 there is a governmental group of experts nominated by the UN Secretary General to look into issues of developing norms for securing cyberspace. And the third part would be on what are the prospects for not only cooperation between India and the United Kingdom, but international cooperation in cyberspace, because I think that is a very key issue that we should look at. So as Rahul mentioned, when India and the UK started to discuss and talk of cooperation in cyberspace, I must acknowledge the role played by William Hague at that time. William Hague was one of those rare politicians who prioritized cyber and brought this into the agenda of the India-UK relationship. And those of us who were in Delhi at that time were infected by this enthusiasm that William Hague had when he invited countries and businesses and civil society to participate in the first London conference on cyberspace, which was held not far from here in 2011. And that set in process a series of global conferences on cyberspace, which we must keep somewhere at the back of our mind, because those global conferences, there have been 5 held so far, London was followed by Budapest, and that was followed by Seoul, then Netherlands, and the last one was in 2017 in New Delhi. They have enabled the larger international community to address issues from all stakeholders on cyberspace, not only governments, but also businesses, civil society, academia, youth. The composition of the global conferences is actually quite important as we enter this area and as we develop international cooperation in cyberspace in the 21st century. And I think, therefore, the role of William Hague is something that I would like to acknowledge right at the very beginning. The other thing that happened with the impulse to try and bring about cooperation on cyber issues was the creation of a bilateral cyber dialogue between India and the United Kingdom. And when we came to London to discuss the areas of cooperation in cyberspace, they fell into what today are considered to be, broadly accepted and understood issues. Cyber crime was one issue, and that the best illustration of cyber crime was that your identity has been stolen by somebody, your credit card details have been abused, and how do you deal with it? And even from the year 2012, there has been a European framework for addressing cybercrime known as the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. And since 2012, India and the UK have been discussing how to cooperate on cybercrime, because India is not a party to the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. But the good news on cybercrime cooperation is that India has passed its own national legislation on cybercrime, which has transported many of the provisions of the Budapest Convention into Indian national law. So in terms of our approach on cybercrime issues, we are working from the same page, although we may have different legislative frameworks impinging on how we act. In terms of cybersecurity, this is a broader framework, and India and the UK have collaborated in fleshing out how to collaborate on cybersecurity. Now, in terms of cybersecurity and the other aspects of cyberspace, it's very important for us to look at how our two countries connect to each other in the cyber world. And the role played here in 2013 by a Vodafone-led initiative to create what is known as the Europe-India Gateway, or EIG. It's a fiber optic cable. It connects a land point in the UK at Bude to Mumbai in India. And it transports data, cyber data, through a fiber optic cable. So that, in a sense, brings India-UK collaboration on the ground to something physical. That we have this fiber optic connection between our two countries, and it's promoted, as I said, by Vodafone, but it also includes significant Indian telecoms companies like Bharti Airtel, Bharat Sanchar Nigam, British Telecom, and several of the telecoms of countries which lie on the route between the UK and India, through the Mediterranean, through the Red Sea, across the Western Indian Ocean, or the Western Indo-Pacific, if we call it in today's terminology, right up to the port of Mumbai, where it makes landfall, and then from there the cyber data is transmitted into India and out of India back to the UK. So that's one physical development which has taken place since we started our cyber dialogue. The other development that has taken place has actually come about not so much because of the UK itself or because of India, but because of the international architecture which in a sense directs the flow of cyber information. We share between India and the UK 6 what are called root servers. These are very technical. These are like traffic signals. And we share, there are 13 such root servers globally. Most of them are based in the United States of America, but 6 of them are commonly shared, although they are based in the United States of America, and one in the Netherlands, one in Sweden. They're shared by India and the UK. And we depend on these root servers to ensure the free flow of data between our two countries in cyberspace. So these are two areas which are often lost sight of in the discussions on cybersecurity, but I think it's important because the question arises as to how does this physical infrastructure actually respond to challenges to cybersecurity. And that's something that's becoming more and more important, not only because of the resilience of this infrastructure, its ability to transport data effectively and without corrupting the data, but also because of challenges to the data from state or non-state actors. And even more important, the issues related to the nature of the data, and here we are sitting even today in the European Union, the issues like privacy of data. Now, the European Union has most recently adopted a global policy on privacy of data called GDPR. It applies to all the European member states, but it's something that is today seen in India as a global standard. And it is something that in India there's an aspiration to emulate in our own regulatory and legislative framework as a kind of yardstick for ensuring the privacy of data and the integrity of data. So, as I said, these are issues which are important, maybe not talked of too much because they're very technical, but they are important even in terms of policy. In terms of policy, India and the UK have built on what Rahul mentioned as the first cyber dialogue that we had in 2012, the visit of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United Kingdom, agreed on a framework agreement on cyber security, which is broken up into 4 working groups. One on cyber diplomacy, and that is something which I'll come back to when we talk of the United Nations Governmental Group of Experts and International Cooperation. One on cyber crime, I've mentioned a bit about it already in terms of the coordination between the approach of the Budapest Convention and the approach of the Indian legal framework on tackling cyber crime. On incident response, this is something that's critical to help people to prevent outages in cyberspace. And there are dedicated teams in every country known as the emergency response teams or CERTs. And how do these technical teams correspond with each other and ensure that the flow of data is uninterrupted and maintains its integrity. And then, of course, the most exciting challenge for our cooperation is in the digital economy. We are all living in the world of an emerging world of electronic commerce and a digital economy. Everything is going online. People are and especially the new generations are going online. And how do we collaborate in policy terms in securing this new dimension of electronic commerce and the digital economy? Now, in terms of how I would see the priorities that lie ahead for us, I think in the area of cyber crime and cyber security, India and the UK need now to activate their working group, which they have set up on cyber crime, to try and bring the form of cooperation, legal cooperation that we have to counter challenges in cyberspace to the 21st century. So far, we are relying on what are known as mutual legal assistance treaties. And that's the way criminal investigations go. Countries cooperate with each other using mutual legal assistance treaties or MLATs. And the time has come when we need to bring in the concept of digital MLATs or electronic MLATs, because the nature of activity in cyberspace does not give us the luxury of using the paper-based method or even the telecom-based method of cooperating with each other, seeking mutual legal assistance from each other, which often involves going to a court of law, getting warrants, getting sanctions, getting approvals for taking law enforcement action at the speed of the paper age. We are now in the digital age. And I think this is something that is important. Companies like Google have recognized it and have recommended that this should be the priority even for the United States. And I think that this is something that India and the UK should identify as a priority. The second is in capacity building. There is this huge image of millions of Indians in the global cyber market. I mean, whether they are in IT or IT-related services, software engineers, and so on. But the nature of cyber is such that every day this technology keeps changing. And here, India and the UK have built a solid foundation for actually pooling their resources, their abilities, to create a pool of updated cyber professionals, cyber technicians, cyber skilled people. The British Telecom last July opened a cyber security operations center in India. And I think that that's the kind of activity that gives an indicator of how India and the UK can work together. It is possible to conceptualize if in a post-Brexit era, people from centers like this, which have been set up by the two countries, using the commercial partners, using commercial entities to, in a sense, provide the necessary skills and technical assistance that is required to maintain and take forward our cyber cooperation. The third is an area which is often neglected but is critical, especially at a time of great volatility, and that is how to protect and safeguard the fiber optic cables that run through the sea lanes of communication in the Western Indian Ocean, through the Red Sea up to the port of Mumbai. This is something that should be adopted as a priority for India and the UK, because historically India and the UK have collaborated even during the pre-independence era of India in protecting the security of shipping going from the Red Sea to Mumbai. And in the modern era, we have collaborated in protecting the same sea lanes of shipping from threats of piracy from off the coast of Somalia. So there is enough experience available to both countries, and my suggestion has been to transfer this experience into the digital domain and look at how to secure these these channels, which also transport cyber data and digital data between our two countries. The fourth area is the electronic commerce area. Here, the United Kingdom has a tremendous advantage. Electronic commerce has been part of the economy of the United Kingdom in a visible, cohesive manner for a longer period than in India. India is now, of course, growing as an electronic commerce market, but the number of Indian companies who are active in electronic commerce are not as many as the size of the Indian market would imply. And there are initiatives taken at the 2018 summit, like creating an India-UK Tech Hub, an India-UK Tech CEO Alliance, which involve companies like Vodafone, British Telecom, Cloudbuy, Intelligent Energy, GTL, Bharti Airtel, Equinity, Wipro, Tata Consultancy Services, and HSBC. These have already companies on both India and the UK which have already joined in implementing this tech initiative between India and the UK. And I think that this should become a priority as the global economy acquires an electronic dimension faster than many people would have thought possible a few years ago. And the fifth area is international cooperation. This is something that's critical because the very nature of cyberspace is such that without international cooperation, the entire sort of security of cyberspace cannot be ensured. The very old saying is that a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And therefore, if we can together ensure that the chain is strong consistently, the global chain is strong consistently at every point, then we can ensure the security and integrity of cyberspace. Now, that brings me to the second area which I wanted to talk about, which was the collaboration in the United Nations Governmental Group of Experts. As I said, the Governmental Group of Experts was set up in 2004. Up to 2012, it had a lot of discussions on how to secure cyberspace. One of the important issues relating to the work of the Governmental Group of Experts is that it is mandated to work within the first pillar of the United Nations system on peace and security, and specifically within the pillar of disarmament. It is a structure which reports to the first committee of the United Nations General Assembly. And I emphasize this because there is a feeling that this group will address itself to issues which are across the board, all over. But it does not. When you look at the recommendations that the group made in 2015, which are known as the 11 norms of the governmental group of experts, which were proposed and adopted in 2015, you can see for yourself that these norms are basically war and peace norms. And they focus mainly on the behavior of states, because this is the traditional approach of disarmament. But my view has been that in an electronic age, in a digital age, we need to actually go beyond just the issues of war and peace, and also look at the linkages between war, peace, and development and human rights. And therefore, the work that we do in the governmental group of experts needs to be expanded. Now, the outcome of the existing governmental group of experts, and the one that will be formed this year, will continue on the traditional peace and security issues. And it has been buffeted by two big issues which have created a gridlock in the work that it does. The gridlock is related to the issue of attributing threats to cyberspace. How do you attribute where the threats to the security of cyberspace are coming from? And the second issue is how do you respond to the threat that you that you perceive to cyberspace. Now, in attribution, the very nature of how data flows in cyberspace shows that it's very difficult to actually attribute with pinpoint accuracy where that threat is coming from. And therefore, there's a need for international cooperation to ensure that you are able to accurately pinpoint where the threat is coming from. That's one. But more important is the response to that threat. And in the group of experts so far, the default position that has been taken is that we will use Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, and that gives us the right to self-defense, and that is what we will use. Now, unfortunately, that brings in the entire Pandora's box of what is the United Nations Security Council. The world leaders meeting in New York in 2005 have already acknowledged that the Security Council is ineffective and it needs to be reformed. The governmental group of experts does not address this issue of reforming the Security Council, especially in terms of the way the Council takes decisions. And until the reform takes place, decisions in the Council are taken by the 5 permanent members who have the veto to veto any decision. So that's the reality. Now, in terms of cyberspace, is this acceptable to the cyber world or not is a question, including companies, including civil society, and so on. So I think that here the charter needs to be. Here we have Virendra-san. How are you? Nice to see you. Not at all. One of India's most prominent, one of the most prominent members of parliament from India. Welcome, Virendra-san. Thank you. So therefore, that takes us to the third issue. And the third issue is on an international framework for cyberspace. There has been a lot of discussion at various conferences and in various intergovernmental forums on the need for international cooperation on cyberspace. We are, I would say, at the same kind of situation as we were in the early 1960s in respect of the maritime domain. There were people who said that we will regulate it ourselves, and between us and bilaterally we will arrange with some countries or a group of countries, and we will find a way out of how to ensure the freedom of navigation on the sea lanes of communication, which is the heart of international cooperation in the maritime space, which is today put in terms of an international legal framework by the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS. Now, in cyberspace, there is no such discussion taking place right now, and it is my hope that institutions like the IISS will help generate a public debate on the need for a framework for international cooperation in cyberspace. Now, for a long time, the proponents of the view that you don't need international cooperation in cyberspace and companies can do it, and why are governments trying to get involved? Well, I'm very happy to tell them that last year, two of the major companies in cyberspace, Microsoft and Google, have themselves come up with the idea of seeking international cooperation in cyberspace to be led by governments. If you look at Microsoft's proposal for a Geneva Digital Convention, which they've unveiled, and they write there that governments should lead for a legally binding agreement. So this is something that's in the Microsoft document itself. And they look for participation in creating this international framework as a multi-stakeholder model. Now that's the model that has been adopted even by the United Nations for cyberspace. If you look at the United Nations program called the World Information Society, or the Tunis Agenda, it's a multi-stakeholder model. It has governments, it has businesses, it has civil society, it has academia. And all of them participated not only in creating the agenda for a global information society, but also the review which took place 10 years later in 2015. All four stakeholders participated. And similarly, in the Global Sustainable Development Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, which many of you have seen the posters of, 17 of them. Implementation of the goals using cyber technology is a priority. And the goals themselves are a product of multi-stakeholder participation. They were not only negotiated by governments, they were negotiated with the participation of governments, businesses, civil society, and academia. So therefore, for a company like Microsoft, they have taken this model and they have proposed that governments, the technological sector, and civil society should participate in what they are calling for a legally binding agreement on through the Geneva Digital Convention. Google has focused on international cooperation specifically on the privacy of data. And that is something that's very interesting because they are calling for, and I quote, develop an internationally legal framework that reflects policy on the privacy of data, and they have proposed the adoption of an International Communication Privacy Act in the United States, which will then become the bedrock for a global international privacy protection regime, legally enforceable. And it is a company like Siemens which actually gives the way forward on how you enforce these legal regimes that are being proposed. And that's another company. And it says that the intention should be to look at it and make it effective in the very same way that the World Trade Organization dispute settlement system has been made effective and affects companies. So here I'm talking of voices from industry. It's not the voice of governments. I don't think governments have articulated these things in the public so far. But since governments do respond to voice of business and industry, I think that it is important for us to look at it and see it. And I'd finally like to conclude by talking of how an international framework on cyberspace could take place, and I think the role of India and the UK in that. And here, having come out of the United Nations, one of the things I learned is you should set clear targets and preferably have a roadmap so that people then will respond to what you're saying. So the clear target I have is to target international framework on cyberspace. I'm not calling it a convention, I'm not calling it anything legal, but a framework on cyberspace to be adopted by the UN's 80th anniversary in September 2025. So that gives us time, but not so much time that will never happen. 5 to 6 years to focus on it. The process could start in September this year at the General Committee of the General Assembly in New York, where India and the UK could take the lead to place this issue on the agenda of the General Assembly. So that's the first step. It has to be put on the agenda of the General Assembly. I would suggest that between now and 2024, that's 5 years, and that's probably realistic, taking in view the amount of time it took for the law of the seas to be agreed to. That took 9 years. Here I'm putting a 5-year framework. By 2024, resolution should be moved by the General Assembly in a multi-stakeholder process, like we did for sustainable development. And it should be adopted in 2024 so that it becomes a treaty available for ratification in the year 2025. This is how I would see it happening. And this is what I think India and the UK should do. Whether the UK is impacted by Brexit one way or the other, I have not made any comment on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mukerji, for the tour de force on cyber norms, governance, and security issues. As a policy relevant institute, we sometimes have some difficulty in extracting the policy relevant parts of speakers' presentation. But in your case, I think it's very clearly that you focused on key issues and suggestions, practical, pragmatic suggestions that both India and the UK could work towards in enhancing cyber security and cyber governance issues. Let me begin the discussion session by just taking a step backwards and from the perspective of the Institute, ask you where you think cyber security issues are in the broader framework of India-UK relations, and where they could be. And the reason I ask is that you've led on cybersecurity issues with the UK when you were in Delhi. Before that, you were posted here as the Deputy High Commissioner, though I think you were the one Deputy High Commissioner that was more acting High Commissioner, all those years. But where do you really see the India-UK cybersecurity governance cooperation in the total mix of trade, investment, counter-terrorism, etc., etc.? And what are the prospects, really, of cybersecurity cooperation becoming maybe not a game changer in bilateral relations, but something that could enhance the bilateral relationship if the convergences are very much there, as you suggest, in certain areas?
Well, I think that there are three areas where this cooperation does and can take place, get enhanced. The first is between governments, and we have actually benefited from each other's experiences in securing what is known as critical national infrastructure, whether they are ports or airports or electric transmission cables or public service utilities, etc. There's a whole list of critical national infrastructure objects, and when you look at the background, that a large amount of India's infrastructure, which is today being upgraded tremendously and very fast, but it originated during the British Indian period. So there are ports, there are roads, highways, railway lines, which actually have a common provenance. And how to upgrade it and how to ensure that the use of digital technology in running this infrastructure, in upgrading the infrastructure and making it the 21st century infrastructure, which is what India is doing today, we need probably to tap into the experience of the United Kingdom, which is also has embarked on upgrading its own infrastructure and bringing it up to speed with the 21st century. So this is something that is very viable. It can happen because we speak the same language. Most of our people are educated in English. There is no, we don't have to learn Chinese or something else. So this is something that can happen quite quickly and will have a tremendous impact. In terms of the second area, and I think that here we need to secure the way our businesses sort of develop and grow, and especially the small and medium sector businesses. The small and medium businesses need cybersecurity more than the bigger businesses because you have to invest a lot in cybersecurity. The big companies, the big corporations are able to find the resources to invest or to secure their operations. But small and medium enterprises need this assistance. Now, today, for example, when you go to conferences or meetings of small and medium enterprises in India, the suggestion given to them by the bigger corporations, which is very interesting, is that you use, and here I'm going a bit technical, but you use cloud to store your data, right? Now, and it's very ironical that the two options being placed in front of Indian small and medium businesses for cloud is one is Amazon, the other is Alibaba. Now, this is something that is very, very interesting and ironic. And therefore, why can't India and the UK actually develop something like a cloud storage for Indian small and medium enterprises? This is something that probably may be viable. It's an idea which some technology entrepreneur may want to develop. And the third area is on development. And this is something that is not only related to India. You see, India today is, for the UK, a very interesting partner because it's one country which has prioritized the use of digital technology for development through two clear processes under this government. One is the use of this biometric database. Today, 1.2 billion Indians have their entire biometric data captured on a biometric database called Aadhaar. So you have the data. Now you have to secure the data. And this is a very big challenge because of the new technologies that come in and impact on the data as well. Because you may have captured the data in 2009 and 10 when it started, but in 2020, you need to make sure that the data you have in your database is secure from the technologies of 2020. But more than that is this very ambitious approach to using cyber technology for development called the Digital India Program. This is something that's it's got 9 clear pillars, as they call it, sectors. And in each of these, there is scope for India and the UK to collaborate. And I would go a final step further and say that we can actually use this collaboration also to effect in third countries, especially in Africa, and in some countries in Southeast Asia. But Africa should be a priority. It has been identified as a priority in the India-UK political relationship. And I think that adding this dimension in the cyber domain would really flesh out what we are trying to do.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're open for discussion, questions, comments. Let me, if you could identify yourself before you ask a question or comment, that would be very useful. Let me start with a familiar face and colleague, Ben Barry.
Ben.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for a really informative talk. There's 2 controversial issues about cyber business and security here in the UK, which I don't think you mentioned. One was the taxation regimes for international cyber-based companies. Amazon, for example, has attracted a lot of adverse comment. And secondly, social media, their responsibilities and accountabilities. For example, there are those who would argue that they should have the responsibilities and accountabilities of a conventional customer, which they are loath to have. I wonder if you've got a view on either issue.
Let me just take 1 or 2 others, and then you can. Yeah.
Khalid Nazim, South Asian Middle East Forum. Last week I had a meeting with Sir Mark Lyle Grant, and I was asking him about intelligence and security questions. And he said the biggest challenges, he thought, were emanating from Russia and China. What is India doing with the challenges coming from China and India? And also I'd like you to detail your cyber security relationship, which I understand is very close, between Israel and India. Because there I understand the exchanges are very security orientated and intelligence based, and they've been used quite a lot, very successfully, in countering terrorism.
Let me take the third person, and then we'll come back to you, and then there are others. Yes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, first of all, nice to see you after many years in London. Security of Indian telecom, if that's not maintained, of course, that it could have repercussions on the international cooperation. So involvement of Chinese telecom equipment, how it could possibly affect, as we know, USA, Australia and other countries are dead against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll answer these 3 sets of questions and then we can move on to other questions. And nice to see you, Ben, again. And thank you for raising these 2 questions. The one on taxation is something that's extremely relevant for India. I don't think there's been a public discussion on taxation of international companies delivering e-commerce or e-services so far. But recent developments in the past 2 weeks regarding Amazon, for example, indicate that there is now an awareness that we need to take some fiscal and taxation policy action, which probably would take into account what has happened in the European Union. I think the role of the European Union as a pioneer in this field needs to be acknowledged, because it went through a process of law, it went through a very transparent process, and the end result was a realization among consumers and customers that they have been actually sort of availing of services for which taxes have been paid in the United States and not in the country where they are sort of residing and where the services have been availed of. And this whole issue goes to the jurisdiction issue of multinational companies, and there's a long background to it, but I think that your question is very relevant and germane to the moment, because India has not yet got its electronic commerce policies in place. It's work in progress. After the last meeting of the World Trade Organization in Buenos Aires in December last year, now there's a task force which is looking into it. There's a task force which Rahul mentioned, which I am chairing in the National Security Council Secretariat on the security of electronic commerce. So we are looking into these areas, but there's nothing definitive in terms of this is the policy. So we are going to get there. Social media responsibilities are extremely important. And, you know, it's not only social media in English, but social media in regional languages in India. And we have seen the impact of social media on large populations. The newspapers not long ago reported on the impact on the sudden exodus of people from northeastern states of India from Bangalore or Bengaluru because of some mischievous social media report. So there has been the Indian response has been not only to only rely on the government, but also take co-opt businesses and civil society. And the role of civil society in areas like Bangalore in raising awareness is tremendous. And I think really, you know, we have not seen many of them in international gatherings. But for example, in Bengaluru, civil society is very well organized. And they do play a big role in generating awareness so that these security issues on social media are, in a sense, raised using social media itself. And that's been tremendously sort of effective, because it's not a top-down decree that's coming from government somewhere, but it's something that's coming as a ground-up response to the social media security issues. On Russia-China challenges in Israel, you know, we have a collaboration in terms of policies. The bulk of India's collaboration in this area is with the United States. And that's inevitable, because the United States controls the infrastructure of digital India. I mean, we have very little digital infrastructure which we have created, which connects us internationally. They've all been created by corporations which are licensed and headquartered in the United States. And I talked of the root servers just to illustrate that point. So there is no alternative to those root servers right now, but probably the alternative that's coming, and which may be linked with your question as well, is the technology known as 5G. Because 5G will really revolutionize the way data is transmitted. And the question will be whether the transmission of data through 5G will impact on the transmission of data through the fiber optic cables that exist today. That is a question which we need to look at and identify. And in terms of the countries, if you've been following this debate in India, there's been a lot of concern about Chinese equipment and Chinese basically equipment in India. And here too, it's a very interesting sort of experience that I can share with you, which is that when we came to the UK for the first time, now seems a long time ago, but six years ago, we were given the Huawei case by the British government and how they managed the Huawei case at that time. Now there's a relook at the way the UK is dealing with Huawei. Probably it's also linked with technology, and with 5G. So what worked in the case of Huawei with pre-5G may not work with Huawei post-5G. with 5G. So this is something that India and the UK need to collaborate on. We have collaborated and understood how the UK has dealt with Huawei in the last 5 years. The other part of India's sort of perception that India is sort of dominated by China in terms of equipment is actually linked with the World Trade Organization rather than with anybody else, because and linked with calls for India to open its economy and liberalize and become an open market, open access to our market. And that is an agreement which was midwifed by the World Trade Organization called the Information Technology Agreement. Under the Information Technology Agreement, India agreed to allow imports of computers and peripherals at zero tariff 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we weren't seeing China as a big exporter of this equipment. Today, it's a global reality that China is the largest exporter of such equipment, which enters India at zero tariff. There's no way any Indian manufacturer can compete with that. There are issues of how the costs of Chinese goods are also calculated, which is linked with anti-dumping and so on. So the Information Technology Agreement, until we have an opportunity to review it, we cannot get rid of our commitment under international trade rules for Chinese imports at zero duty. Probably the chance to review it will come if the World Trade Organization introduces a brand new negotiation on electronic commerce. And that is an issue which is building steam, which includes definition of products and definition of services and so on. So I will leave it at that.
What about
Israel? I'm coming to Israel. I'm not ducking the Israel one, because that's a very nice question that you asked. And the Israel, you see, place the question that you asked on Israel in the context of the global infrastructure of the digital communications. And where does Israel fit? Israel doesn't have any of the root servers that I mentioned. There are 13 root servers. 11 are in the United States. One is in Sweden and one is in the Netherlands. And that's it. So both Israel and India are dependent on the United States infrastructure for their digital transmission of data between each other. What is the use we make? And that's the question. The application of our data. That is something that is driven by cooperation between the security establishments of not only India and Israel, but India and all the Western countries. And don't forget that for us, the impact of the security of this technology on our security was brought home in November 26, 2008, when an entire city was held to terrorist ransom using voice over internet protocol. That was how instructions were sent to those people on the ground in Mumbai. So how do you deal with that? And that's one of the reasons behind India's so-called perception that India wants to democratize the management of the internet. But we have not been able to penetrate the policies of companies which say that we have to protect our data, we have to follow due process of law through the mutual legal assistance treaties, and so on and so forth. There's a huge layer of local laws, in this case in the United States, which many countries, including in Europe, are unable to penetrate. And therefore, there is a need for something to be done. So that's a different issue. But in terms of securing cyberspace, you'll have to look at India-Israel cooperation as you'd look at cooperation between India and the United Kingdom or the UK or United States. You know, it has to be equal with everybody.
Let me turn to this. The lady there, yes, please, third row.
Hello, Joyce Hague from Chatham House. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. So India has always given, or one of the main reasons that India has always given for not joining the Budapest Convention is that it hasn't participated in the negotiation and development of that convention. Now that the Indian cybercrime legislation is basically modeled after the Budapest Convention, my question is, does this reason still stand? And are we about to see, a change of position in India joining the convention? And if not, what are actually the concrete measures or routes that India can take to enhance its international cooperation, not bilateral, which is very much needed for fighting cybercrime.
Thank you.
That's an important question. I think do you want to respond to this?
I'm in your hands. You're moderating. I'll follow you.
Because it shows India's thinking on some of
No. It's a very important point, and it's a point which has come up in all the conversations we've had with countries who are party to the Budapest Convention, as well as with Brussels, because they have obviously great interest in making the Budapest Convention more than a regional convention. And they have got countries which are outside Europe, as you know, who have now joined the Budapest Convention. Now, there are two things here which are probably relevant in the answer to your question. The first is that the provisions that exist in the Budapest Convention as it is today, and the convention itself is almost 20 years old now, almost. Those provisions have to reflect the changes on the ground. Because you cannot have provisions on fighting cybercrime based on technologies which were not there in 2003 or 4 or 5, when that convention was negotiated. So is there an opportunity to upgrade the Budapest Convention and introduce things like I have spoken of electronic Inlets, which is a demand from Google, for example? Can we bring in that, because the United States is also party to the Budapest Convention? Can we bring that into this? And I, therefore, that is the background which I have in mind when I propose an international framework. My suggestion in the India-EU cyber dialogue, which I participate in, is that upgrade the Budapest Convention by making it the integral part of an international framework on cybercrime. So that for cybercrime, the chapter on cybercrime, you have the Budapest Convention, and that becomes a global convention. That is the way I think we need to cooperate, and that will overcome this very nationalistic thing that I am not a party and therefore I will not accept it. That point has been taken not only by India but by several other countries who say that we are not part of Europe, so why should we accept a convention which is European, isn't it? And I think that the role of the global conferences on cyberspace in getting this acceptability has been tremendous. I mean, you've been, I think, active in participating in some of them. And I think that we need to listen to this voice which is coming as to the way forward, because we cannot sink into these narrow, isolated silos in an area where we need a very, very active international cooperation. I don't think we have that luxury.
Let me take the next two questions that are Adil and then the lady behind.
Yeah. Thank you. Adil from King's College. Ambassador, thank you for this interesting presentation. You talked about India-UK cooperation and with the international agencies or other countries, but you didn't cover the regional countries. Do you see any value in having some kind of a regional kind of a CBM with especially countries like Pakistan? What I'm saying is, I'm referring to the military aspects of this. Can we think about a CBM not to attack each other's command and control with cyber attack with Pakistan? I understand right now it's not possible, but I'm talking about the futuristic sense. Can you think about such kind of CBMs in the cyberspace?
The lady behind.
Hi, so I'm Paula Walsh from the Foreign Office working on cyber policy. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. The first one on the UN process. And the UNGG has been successful over the last few years in agreeing international replies, the norms that you mentioned, the confidence building measures as well, which I think the gentleman was referring to. What has been more difficult was how international replies, and that is always the case, whether it's cyber or not, how international replies is always more complicated. The UK Attorney General gave his speech in May this year to sort of be transparent about what the UK thinks. And so a couple of questions here. One, could India do something similar in terms of how it sees international reply and giving its view? And then also, how do you see the process this year with the open-ended working in the UN, and how do we make those processes complementary and making progress, etc. Then my second question was actually on the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth Declaration last year, and how the UK and India can cooperate more on capacity building around the Commonwealth, and so having that sort of leadership voice around the Commonwealth.
Thank you. I'll answer these two sets of questions. On the confidence building measures in the regional context and India-Pakistan context, I think there is in this area, if you look at it purely in terms of disarmament, India and Pakistan actually are doing something in the nuclear field. Every year on the 1st of January, we exchange lists of nuclear installations, and that has happened despite the situation in the last few years between India and Pakistan. So in the cyber area, I would be surprised if this did not get the same kind of outcome. The point is, where does this discussion start between India and Pakistan? Does it start in the bilateral or in a regional context of SAARC? If so, who will take the initiative to raise it in the South Asian Regional Forum, etc.? To the best of my knowledge, in South Asia, this issue of cybersecurity actually has been left off the radar screen. And part of it is also due to the fact that the companies which are involved in cyberspace are global or are not necessarily national companies. And therefore their interests in South Asia are a bit different from companies which are headquartered or based in South Asia. So we need to work, because the policy and the implementation depend on governments and companies. That's the way of the nature of the beast. I mean, of this area. So I would say in terms of policy, it makes sense and could apply. But the question I would raise is, who and where would this idea be initiated and carried forward? Would it be in the United Nations, or would it be in the South Asian Regional Cooperation context, or any other forum? In terms of what you asked, yes, international law. I have been talking of an international framework. When I first talked of an international convention, there was a huge resistance to that by the lawyers who said we don't want more conventions. But now that I have been referring to the companies, the major companies, they themselves want an international framework. So we need to look at something that is an international framework rather than a United Nations Security Council-led process, because whether the Security Council resolutions or a decision is international law or not is disputed. Especially more and more so these days, despite Article 25 of the UN Charter, countries do not always believe that the Security Council has the right to set international law. I mean, it can for everything. And when you look at cyber, and I mentioned it because of the nature of cyber. Cyber is obviously not in the UN Charter. It wasn't thought of in 1945. So isn't there a need to actually even have a discussion on the Charter and cyber issues to bring in the cyber world into the UN Charter? It hasn't happened so far in terms of peace and security. Who will do it with the current polarization between the permanent members? Will it take root or not? These are questions which need to be addressed. And there's the larger question of the mandate of 2005 to reform the Council. So you cannot keep adding to the Council's activities without reforming the Council, which has been agreed to in 2005, on which India and the UK have the same stand. I mean, you're part of the 122 country group that put the reform paper on the table in September 2015. So I think this needs to be talked about. But in terms of the GGE, I think that the new GGE, which will be formed, in order to make itself relevant to setting the norms for cyberspace, even if you look at it in terms of purely disarmament issues, because that's their mandate, would need to do two things. One is take the norms, the 11 norms that they agreed to in 2015, and see if these norms can apply in the year 2020. Taking into account the changes in technology that have taken place. The biggest one is this so-called, all this technology that comes under the fourth industrial revolution. I don't think the GGE of 2015 had the opportunity to talk of the fourth industrial revolution technologies. But when you look at artificial intelligence especially, Internet of Things, blockchain, you have to bring these technologies into the discussion in the GGE. And then it will be possible for the norms that come out of these discussions to be relevant to the world to which they are sought to be applied. Right? So that's one step. And I think, going by our experience of how in this area we need to tap into knowledge wherever it comes from, there should be some kind of way for the GGE to have what the Security Council calls an ARIA format, which is to bring in members from outside the GGE into these discussions. Because you and I know that the GGE is operated in a very UN bureaucratic system where there is no roster of expertise globally available given to the UN. The UN itself decides who are the countries who should come. There's no rationale or reasoning given. There's no vote in the General Assembly or anything like that which decides which countries get to sit on the GGE. But the 5 permanent members have always been there for some reason which is not known to everybody. So, these are the kind of things that need to be addressed. And I think that, therefore, the GGE can make itself more attractive to the broader international community by co-opting knowledge-based entities, individuals, to participate in their discussions on how to make their norms relevant, and also, your first question, how to make the norms enforceable. I think enforceability of norms is very, very important, because otherwise the norms just remain pieces of paper. I mean, if you can't enforce the norms. And therefore the cooperation of corporations, companies, etc., who actually run cyberspace is as important. And cooperation of people who intellectually set the standards, the lawyers, the academics, etc., is as important. And I think that, therefore, what I am leading up to is a multi-stakeholder GGE, but that's...
Unfortunately, we have time for only the last...
It's very odd that an Indian should call for a multi-stakeholder GGE.
Unfortunately, we have time for only the last 2 interventions, so I'll take the lady here, and where you were...
It was just complementary to what you just said about the international framework. I was wondering if it was something that was non-binding, more like what happened for the Global Compact on Migration. And yes, it was a round of negotiation between countries, but wouldn't it be wise to integrate within the cybersecurity firms and companies that are actually the one experts on the field, and maybe have them in the negotiation, just like consultative? I was wondering what you...
Could you identify yourself, please?
I'm a master's student in security leadership at King's College.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Purva, and I'm a cybersecurity advisor for Deloitte Consulting. Yes. My question is, people say that, there's a saying in security says, people are the weakest link to security. So how does policymakers and practitioners of this cybersecurity framework intend to deal with this?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, but let me answer the first one. The Global Compact on Migration experience has left a bad taste in the mouth of many participants, countries, people, etc., because of the perception of what it was. I mean, the perception that it was, in a sense, going to have an impact on the ground, when the first premise was that it is not legally binding on anybody. It was just good practices or good sort of principles. And I think that in cyber, we need to be careful in terms of what we are looking for. If you're looking for security, then we have to make it enforceable. But otherwise, you will not get the objective of security. So it will, in that sense, be different from the Global Compact on Migration, because here you need to have something that's enforceable. But there is an element in that bigger universe that I talked of good principles and best practices, which is very, very important, and on which not much is spoken of. And that's the second question that you raised, which is the people involved in cybersecurity. It's something that people like us who have been sort of asked to deal with it for the last decade or so have been thinking about constantly. And I think that it's really difficult for societies to expect people to focus on cybersecurity after they've got jobs. And then say that we're going to train people in cybersecurity in banks and government departments and so on. The suggestion that some of us make is that you have to start cybersecurity as part of primary school education and make it part of the school curriculum. That's why, because you see, young kids are intuitively cyber oriented. Look at the way they use the devices. And that brings us to the devices, because there was a time when all of us carried laptops or, went to computer terminals. Today you have a smartphone, you don't need any of these devices. So there's a huge change that's taking place in technology, even as I speak. And maybe 2 years later, there'll be another speaker who will have a completely new world which he'll be talking about. This is the nature of the world that we're dealing with, but the people are important. And I'm very glad you asked this question, because this is what I think is important for governments. And if the UK and India can actually focus on this, because we have an education initiative, we have collaboration between India and the UK in schools and colleges and universities, maybe how to introduce cyber security as part of school syllabi is something that would be very, very important. Something for you.
Well, thank you, Madam Mukherjee. This has been very useful. You provided some very important ideas and suggestions. You asked as to on some issues, which organization can take things forward. I think the IISS, we do have a strong program on cybersecurity and cyber governance, and I think we are making actually cyber work as a key component of our overall of our work for the Institute. So I'd like to really just, you've already been given the traditional applause, so I'd like to just thank you again and really commend you on your interaction here with us today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rahul. As a fully paid up member of IISS, you shouldn't have expected less.
Thank you.